Ontario has banned French as a language of instruction in its schools. They are in no mood to be forced to fight for England.
If we are asked to go fight for England, we will respond. Give us back our schools.
The Archbishop of Montreal, Monsignor Bruchesi, sends a warning to Prime Minister Borden.
Dear Sir Robert, do you not think, in light of our population, that we have largely done our share? The people are agitated. In the province of Quebec, we can expect deplorable revolts. Will this not end in bloodshed?
Dear Archbishop Bruchesi, I had the great privilege of looking into the eyes of tens of thousands of men at the front, who look to us for the effort which will make their sacrifice serve the great purpose for which it was undertaken. No one realizes more fully than I do the gravity and importance of the step which I have taken.
Henri Bourassa is firmly opposed to conscription, despite the jeers of Ontario colonists who refer to him as Herr Bourassa.
It is your duty, as Canadians and as British subjects, to do all you may possibly do to prevent the conscription bill from being voted. Your first duty as Canadians, whether of French or English blood, whether Catholic or Protestant, is to save Canada from ruin and suicide.
Sir Wilfrid Laurier, now leader of the opposition, is also convinced that conscription will tear the country apart.
Is it not true that the main reason advocated for conscription, not so much publicly as privately, not shouted but whispered, is that Quebec must be made to do her part, and French Canadians forced to enlist compulsorily, since they did not enlist voluntarily?
The debate is passionate, and not only in French Canada. In English Canada, many workers, farmers, and non-British immigrants also oppose conscription. The Reverend J.S. Woodsworth, a social reformer and pacifist from Winnipeg, is one of the few English Canadians bold enough to speak out against conscription.
I am not a pro-German. I am not a slacker or a coward. I had thought that as a Christian minister I was a messenger of the Prince of Peace. Christianity may be an impossible idealism, but so long as I hold it, ever so unworthily, I must refuse as far as may be to participate in or to influence others to participate in war.
Manitoba Labour leader Fred Dixon is maligned and beaten for his stance against conscription.
If I have to shed my blood, I would prefer to do it here, where I know it would be for freedom.
Despite furious objections, in August 1917, military service becomes obligatory for single men from 20 to 45. All summer, crowds in Quebec denounce conscription. Night after night, thousands march in Montreal. "19 days have passed since Anna LaChapelle borrowed her sister-in-law's baby.
I told my husband, look, there's a man coming to see us. My husband says, stay calm and rock the baby. My husband opens the door. Hello, sir. Sets out a chair. But the man comes straight to me. You've got a pretty little baby. She looks just like you. He talked to us for a bit. Then he said he had to be going. The sweat was pouring down my back. I couldn't stand it.
In Ottawa, conscription destroys the Liberal Party. Laurier, who has spent his career working for French-English harmony, sees most of his English-speaking MPs desert him, joining Borden in a coalition government. The old man is devastated.
I find myself separated from colleagues whom I cherish like brothers. I follow my conscience just as they follow theirs. But this means we are living through tremors which, unless they subside, could shatter the country into pieces.
In October 1917, Borden calls an election. Conscription is the only issue.
Our first duty is to win. The ground must be carefully and completely prepared.
The Tories launch a strong campaign against Quebec. It becomes the foul blot on Canada. French Canadians are called slackers and cowards, and Wilfrid Laurier is depicted as a traitor. To ensure victory, Borden passes a draconian law, the Wartime Elections Act. All those who had come from enemy countries within the past 15 years are stripped of their right to vote. Others, however, are given the vote for the first time. Women who have a husband, son, or brother at the front, they are sure to support conscription. To no one's surprise, the Union government wins. But Borden is not out of trouble. 90% of conscripts ask for exemption, even amongst the English Canadians who voted so massively in favor of conscription. Borden responds by canceling all exemptions in April 1918. It is in Quebec City that Archbishop Bruchézy's worst fears come true. On Holy Thursday, a young man is arrested at a bowling alley for not having his registration papers with him. A mob gathers and turns violent. Canon Scott's wife, Amy, lives in Quebec City.
They ransacked the registrar's office in the auditorium building in their hunt for papers, set it on fire, and then turned their attention to the two government newspaper offices, L'Événement and the Chronicle, smashing everything to pieces.
The mob riots for 4 days. Soldiers from Ontario and the West are sent in. The evening of Easter Monday, 1918, ends in violence and death. Amy Scott writes to her husband.
Nothing can describe our feelings as we stand and listen to the rattle of machine guns, the shouts and cries of the angry mob, and think of the bloodshed and fighting that is going on a few hundred yards below us.
In all, 4 unarmed civilians are killed and dozens injured. Honoré Bergeron, a 49-year-old father of 6. Alexandre Bussière, a 25-year-old mechanic. Joseph-Édouard Tremblay, a 23-year-old student. And Georges Demeule, just 14 years old.
The army started shooting. The little Demeule kid was with us. We got down on all fours along the sidewalk. The Demeule kid took off across the street and got hit. Next morning, when we got to work, pieces of flesh were still all over the fence where Demeule had been hit.
A year later, Sir Wilfrid Laurier is buried in Ottawa. Canada's conscripts had helped bring the war to an end in 1918. But Laurier's dream of unifying English and French Canadians has been shattered. Not since Louis Riel was hanged has the country been so divided. Laurier leaves these despairing words to those who would choose his successor.
Do not choose a French Canadian. The situation of a French Canadian Prime Minister is impossible, and he can do nothing for his people.
On November 11th, 1918, the armistice is signed. The war is finally over. People around the world fill the streets, kiss strangers, laugh, cry, dance, and sing. In Canada, there are parades and celebrations everywhere. And yet, even as people celebrate peace, a new horror has begun.
We were so glad the war was over, and our brave boys came home again. But what they found on their returning was worse than on the battle plain. For now they saw their sisters dying, mothers and fathers, brothers too. In all the world, no place is safe from the deadly grip of the Spanish flu.
The war may be over, but one of the most terrible epidemics in history rages on. The Spanish influenza kills more than 20 million people. In Canada, it claims almost as many lives as the Great War.
My mother, my older sister, and 4 brothers were ill with the flu. After 8 days, my mother, only 40 years old, got pneumonia and died. My father and I attended her funeral at 4 o'clock on November 11th, 1918, to the sounds of bells ringing for the armistice.
Many soldiers who are spared death on the battlefield return to find they have not escaped it at home. Lieutenant Arthur Joseph Lapointe arrives in his village.
My father, his face somber, said to me, "We didn't want to tell you of the misfortune that had descended upon us, because we didn't know when you would be home, and we knew the news would make your life there unbearable. The terrible flu epidemic has taken 3 of your brothers and 2 sisters in just 9 days. It is not the return home that I dreamed of. It seems to me that my life will always be empty now. My God, if it was to know such suffering upon my return, why did I not die at the front, killed by a bullet?"
The soldiers' dreams of a better world after the war are not to be. Thousands of veterans are unemployed and unemployable. Canada is in debt. The cost of resettling returned soldiers and finding pensions for war widows and their families is huge. The returned men want jobs, bonus payments, and recognition. The veterans' efforts eventually lead to the adoption of one of the most generous pension plans for veterans in the world. This pension, however, does not offer benefits to native veterans. Along with Japanese Canadians, they also lose their wartime right to vote. Mike Mountain Horse returns as a hero with the Distinguished Conduct Medal.
We all had to behave like men in France, and I think I did so.
Following the custom of his people, he paints the story of his war experience on a cowhide robe. Roy McPhee comes home safe and sound. His brother Arthur also returns from the front, only to be killed a few months later in an explosion while clearing stumps. Frank Maheu goes back to the lumber camps, once again separated from his wife and children.
No use telling you that I'm lonesome. I am earning some money. And always, I think of you.
Nellie McClung's son, Jack, comes home without a scratch after 3 years in the trenches. But his mother knows that her son will never be the same.
I knew there was a wound in his heart, a sore place. That hurt look in his clear blue eyes tore at my heartstrings, and I did not know what to do. When a boy, who has never had a gun in his hands, never desired anything but the good of his fellow men, is sent out to kill other boys like himself, even at the call of his country, something snaps in him, something which may not mend.
Canon Scott returns to the pulpit of his Anglican church in Quebec City. In spite of the loss of his son Harry, he has not lost hope for his country. The Treaty of Versailles at the end of the war awards Canada her own place in the League of Nations. Canon Scott preaches a fresh, proud Canadian outlook.
Pessimists and alarmists are lamenting the unsettlement of the times. But when we consider that we were plunged in a war, the end and duration of which we could not foresee, I think the settlement of our condition today is a marvelous achievement and testifies to the common sense and sanity of our young country.
The war may be over, but Canada is about to enter a period of tumult unlike anything it has known before. It will begin in Winnipeg, at the corner of Portage and Main.
How dare you ask a man to go out and risk his life? And when he returns, calmly request him to hand in his uniform, and in exchange, hand him a pittance that will reduce a once self-respecting citizen to a miserable pauper, dependent on either charity or friends.
Helen Armstrong is worried about the bleak future facing returning soldiers in the working class after the war. Fred Dixon is angry about the past.
Those responsible for the Ross rifle, defective shells, shoddy clothes, paper boots, and the whole black record of profiteering gave 10,000 times more aid and comfort to the enemy than all the socialists and conscientious objectors put together.
People were expecting a better world after the misery of war. Instead, many people cannot find jobs. Inflation is rampant. Round steak is up from 10 cents to 39 cents a pound, and coffee has doubled in price. Tensions are mounting all over Canada. It is in Winnipeg that they will explode. The city's building and metal workers demand the right to bargain through more powerful centralized unions. Winnipeg's employers refuse. Fred Gordienko, a Ukrainian blacksmith, works in a CNR shop.
I meet a union leader in the street. He tells me, Fred, we can't avert a strike. We have to go because they don't want absolutely to take consideration of what we want. He told me, we don't like strike, but we're forced to do it because the other way? How do you defend your rights?
Blacksmiths, local 61. 121 for, 6 against.
When their demands aren't met, the building and metal workers walk off the job on May 1st, 1919. It is an ordinary strike, but it sparks an extraordinary response. It has only been 18 months since the Tsar of Russia was overthrown, following a general strike in Petrograd. Talk of revolution is sweeping the world, and militants promote the idea of the general strike, the shutting down of entire cities, as the only way of achieving their goal here at home. On May 15th, a general strike is called in Winnipeg. The first to walk out are the Hello Girls, Winnipeg's telephone operators. Within 2 hours, the city is almost completely paralyzed. 30,000 union and non-union workers leave their jobs. Sympathy strikes break out all across the country. Ottawa fears a Bolshevik revolution. It is up to Arthur Meehan, acting Minister of Justice, to stifle the strike before Canadians panic.
The leaders of the general strike are all revolutionists of varying degrees and types, from crazy idealists to ordinary thieves.
J.S. Woodsworth returns to his hometown from Vancouver to see if he can help his old friends. Soon he is working with Fred Dixon at the Western Labor News, printing a daily strike bulletin.
This strike is not engineered from Russia. In reality, the strike has nothing to do with revolution. It is an attempt to meet a very pressing and immediate need. The organized workers, like everyone else, are faced with the high cost of living. Like most people, they imagine it, if they can get higher wages, they can buy more food.
Winnipeg's employers fight back. The Citizens Committee of 1,000, led by A.J. Andrews, unites them against the workers.
The only way to deal with Bolshevism is to hit it, and to hit it hard, every time it lifts its ugly head.
Ottawa takes direct aim at the strike leaders, making it easier to deport immigrants without trial.
They say one of our strike leaders is a German. I don't care what a man is if he's whole under the skin and a worker. The only enemy alien we have in Canada is the capitalist and the strikebreaker.
As head of the Women's Labor League, Helen Armstrong organizes the women workers and workers' wives. She spends 3 days in jail on a charge of inciting to disorder.
Peace is all right for the folk who ride in automobiles and the thugs in red coats who do their bidding. There will be no peace for the worker until we get a living wage and proper living conditions.
For 6 weeks, the strike committee virtually runs Winnipeg. The city fires all but 16 policemen, and anti-strike specials are sworn in to replace them. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police, the Redcoats, are also brought in. On June 10th, a crowd gathers to hear a speech. The Special Police try to disperse them. A riot breaks out, in which one police officer is injured. The strikers seem to be winning. Business leaders are panicked and demand harsh measures. The federal authorities step in and arrest the strike leaders. Helen Armstrong's husband, George, is one of 10 strike leaders arrested and spirited away to Stony Mountain Penitentiary. To protest this extraordinary action, veterans who support the strike organize a silent parade on June 21st in defiance of a ban by Winnipeg's Mayor Charles Gray. A large crowd of 6,000 gathers in front of City Hall. A streetcar operated by strikebreakers approaches on its route. The veterans overturn it and set it on fire. The mounted police charge.
People were excited. I was in the corner where the shooting started. I see the mounted police turn the corner and one of the horses fall down. And after that, 2 or 3 mounted police get mixed up with that. Someone falls, someone jumps.
One man, standing on the sidewalk, thought the Mounties were firing blank cartridges until a spectator standing beside him dropped with a bullet through his breast. Another standing nearby was shot through the head. Lines of special police swinging their big clubs were thrown across Main Street and the intersecting thoroughfares. Dismounted redcoats lined up, declaring military control.
2 people are killed. 94 are arrested. Like the conscription riots of Quebec City, once again a popular demonstration is brutally repressed. "40 days after it began, the largest social revolt in Canadian history has been crushed.
Whoever ordered the shooting last Saturday is a Kaiser of the deepest dye."
Following Bloody Saturday, Fred Dixon publishes an article that leads to charges of seditious conspiracy. At his trial, he pleads to the jury to defend free speech.
Liberty of opinion. That is what is on trial. I advised men to use their ballots and keep the peace. You are the last hope so far as the liberty of the subject is concerned. In your hands is placed the question of liberty of speech, whether a man has a right to criticize government officials or not.
Dixon is acquitted. Many others are jailed or deported. Fred Gordienko is asked to leave his blacksmith's job.
They start to lay off after the strike. The Russian, the immigrants, start to lay them off, and then they come to lay me off too. The union try to fight. They say, "If you want, we will fight for you." I said, "This job in the shop. The smoke, the dirt, is not worth to put all the union to fight." And so we went, about 5 of us.
In the years to come, there will be other defining clashes between labor and capital. Glace Bay, Nova Scotia, is virtually occupied by the army during a bitter strike in 1925. And beyond the factories and smelters, a new movement is arising, one that will reshape the political face of Canada.
great generals and great colonels over there. Your big guns and your aeroplanes are flying through the air. Of course they all were needed, but this thing you must allow. They couldn't win the war without the man behind the plow.
Farmers across Canada are tired and disillusioned with traditional politics. The promise not to conscript their sons was broken in 1918. A post-war economic slump threatens their livelihood. And now the young are heading to the cities, leaving the land. Agnes MacPhail grew up on a farm in Grey County, Ontario. She is a schoolteacher now, but remains keenly aware of the farmer's plight.
To farm is the most arduous and most poorly paid of all occupations. Farmers work 12 hours a day to feed people who work 8 hours, and still some people call that a square deal.
The time has come for the farmers to defend their interests, and like the workers in Winnipeg, they organize.
A class of idle rich has grown up in our cities, to whose love of ostentation, commerce, and industry are now pandering. These enervated and miserable specimens of humanity rush about the country in great cars, flaunt their wealth in our faces, tear up our roads, and cast their dust upon our fields.
W.C. Good is one of the organizers of the United Farmers of Ontario. He is a farmer, writer, and inventor. Good decries the wheat dealers who control the price of grain and the city-born politicians who are indifferent to farmers. Agnes MacPhail becomes a convert and a rousing speaker herself.
Your grandparents and mine are the real builders of this country. They built the foundation of the country strong and true. And if we sit around and let the captains of the city so undermine it that this land for which they toiled so hard is taken out of our hands by the fiscal policy of this Dominion, we are not worthy of our heritage.
The United Farmers of Ontario become a powerful political force, winning the provincial election in 1919. Then the tide turns west. The leader of the United Farmers of Alberta is Henry Wise Wood. He came to Canada from the U.S. in 1906. Over 100,000 Americans had settled in the prairies, bringing with them a tradition of protest.
We as farmers are downtrodden by every other class. We have groveled and been ground into the dirt. We are determined that this shall not be. We will organize for our protection. We will nourish ourselves and gain strength, and then we shall strike out in our might and overthrow our enemies.
The farmers consider the established parties inherently corrupt and decide they can create a better alternative. Irene Parlby's initiative in organizing a farm women's club exposed political talents she had never imagined she would use. She begins campaigning in the 1921 provincial election for the United Farmers of Alberta. On election day, the UFA sweeps away the Liberals, winning a clear majority. Irene Parlby wins a seat, becoming Alberta's first woman cabinet minister in a government dominated by politically inexperienced farmers. But they do have ideals.
The future is to the strong. But my idea deals with moral values, not with physical strength. Strength to do the right thing in the face of any temptation. The moral strength that alone can give us clean government, can abolish the patronage system, despotism, corruption, bribery, and all the other ills of our political system.
By 1921, when a federal election is called, farmers are ready to take their crusade onto the national stage. The Progressive Party is born. Agnes MacPhail runs as a candidate for the Progressives in Grey County, Ontario. She is the first woman to run for office at the federal level.
There is one more battle to fight, one more victory to win. The date is December 6th, and the sword is the ballot. Vote early and vote right. And by 6 p.m., our country will have been redeemed from the greedy hand of the spoiler.
William Lyon Mackenzie King, the new Liberal leader, becomes Prime Minister. The Progressives win enough seats to form the official opposition, but refuse the role because they believe each member should vote according to local wishes, not along party lines. The political map of Canada will never be the same. At the age of 31, Agnes MacPhail becomes the first woman to sit in the House of Commons.
On my desk, the first day, I found a bouquet bearing on the card an unfamiliar name. I was much interested, until I found that it was the loser of a wager who bought the flowers. Poor chap. Well, I enjoyed them anyway.
MacPhail will be the only woman in Parliament until 1929, when the first woman senator is named. Earlier that year, the Alberta Five: Emily Murphy, Nellie McClung, Irene Parlby, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir-Edwards went all the way to the British Privy Council with the Persons case. It is ruled that women are persons and as such can sit in the Senate. It is a landmark in the movement for women's rights in Canada. Florentine Maher had always lived in the small Quebec village of Warwick. She is 32 and the mother of 6 children. When her husband, Upton, a cheese inspector, is asked to relocate to Montreal, Florentine is delighted.
My childhood dream is coming true. Living in town and doing all the things I love. We moved to Montreal in August 1922.
Thousands of rural families flood the cities, despite the pleas of traditionalists who see the city as a corrupting evil where assimilation and American values rule. Florentine Maher loves the diversity of city life.
In our street, there were all kinds of people. Day workers, the wealthy, the unemployed, a milkman, and 2 Italian families, the Colangelos and the Materesses.
Thousands of Canadians are also moving to American cities, including Florentine's sister and her family. Between 1921 and 1931, almost 1 million Canadians moved south, mostly from Quebec and the Maritimes. Alexandre Taschereau, the Liberal Premier of Quebec, has a plan to stem the tide. Taschereau solicits American investment in the development of Quebec's largely untapped natural resources.
There is a factor in our national expansion that the government will not neglect. That of the preservation of our population and the repatriation of our people who live in the United States.
Premier Taschereau is generous to a fault. He makes deals for land and privileges. Many Quebec towns boom as a result of the massive influx of capital from pulp and paper and mining investors. Henri Bourassa worries that Premier Taschereau is selling off the nation's jewels. The two face off in the Quebec legislature.
At this rate, American capital will soon rule over Canada and Canadians. We could and should be alarmed. We should not be surprised. It's the direct result of our wartime spending spree. We wanted to play the part of a great nation. We've gone bankrupt to save civilization and democracy. We are now at the mercy of our neighbors. They grew rich at the game that ruined us.
Premier Taschereau is unapologetic.
I am not afraid, and I will never be afraid, that our French Canadians will become Americanized because of an inflow of American capital. They have resisted other dangers and other trials. And as I have said many times, I prefer to import an American dollar than to export a Canadian worker.
All across Canada, American dollars give the economic recovery a very big boost. Pulp and paper is Canada's leading export, and Americans own more than 1/3 of Canada's pulp production. Canadians also drive American cars, and American-owned automotive plants stretch in a thin line from Oshawa to Windsor. By the end of the decade, the American Big Three manufacture 3/4 of the cars purchased in Canada. Florentine Maher and her family take vacations in their brand new sedan.
Our second car was a McLaughlin Buick. We would go to Saint-François-du-Lac with friends, the kids all dressed up. Things were getting better, and whatever new gadget was out there, my husband would buy it.
After years of hard times, people just want to have fun. Lotta Dempsey is a young reporter for the Edmonton Bulletin during the heady days of the 20s.
By now, I was pantingly compensating for my wallflower days at school. There were lots of beaux to go around, and we danced, skated, went canoeing on the river, had wonderful weekends in Jasper and Banff, and sang around home pianos.
Florentine Maher's favorite activity is the cinema.
I wouldn't miss an opportunity. I had lived so long without any of these distractions. So often I would go to the Plaza Theatre on Sunday afternoons. They'd be showing the silent films of Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd. I was young and loved to laugh. It was so much fun.
There's also a new craze in the 1920s, radio. Hockey Night in Canada is one of the most popular programs. But as the decade progresses, American radio shows are increasingly popular, and Canadian culture has a hard time finding its place in the market.
What you doing, Andy?
Hello there, Amos. Just checking my bank account here.
Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow.
Still in her 20s, Lotta Dempsey is sent off in 1929 to interview Canadian actress Mary Pickford, who has left Canada to become a movie star in Hollywood.
I came home aglow with adventure and determined to repay the boss with good performances, then to take off to farther fields. But something had happened while I was on the train journey back. The date was October 24th, 1929. The stock market had crashed. Depression was upon us. It was as simple as that.
While the Depression rages, Lotta Dempsey will provide for her parents. She still has a job, though her salary is cut by half. For Canadians, the days of war and the days of dancing are over.